So one of our most popular videos on JTV is about the Nazi prophecies that are absolutely astonishing that you find in the Book of Esther, one of the books in the Torah, in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, where there is basically clear evidence of prophecy of the Nazis that would exist centuries later, and a very strong case to make that the Nazis and Hitler were descendants of Amalek, who was a descendant of Haman, who was the arch villain that seeks to wipe out the Jews in the story of Purim. And I wanted to touch on this in some more detail with you. I've just recently received this book, a new book that's come out, which I highly recommend you get. I did an interview with Rabbi Raphael Shaw a few months ago, who's the author of this book, and it's called Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? Learning to Love the Lessons of Jew Hatred. And it's had some fantastic endorsements, but it's all about the roots of Jew hatred and really what some of the lessons are of understanding the deeper reasons. I think a lot of Jewish people are baffled by it. So understanding the deeper reasons and the Jewish solutions to it. But what I want to touch on today was the issue of Hitler and his obsession with Purim. See, that's something we didn't touch on in the video. We spoke about the connections between Purim and Amalek and the Nazis and Haman and the Nazis. But it turns out the Nazis themselves and Hitler himself had a fascination with this story, with the festival of Purim, which Jews are on the brink of celebrating very shortly. And I want to read you an extract from the book to understand what was going on in Hitler's mind and why Purim is so essential to his thinking. So have a listen to this extract. Really fascinating stuff. There was one thing that Hitler struggled with: the indestructibility of the Jews. As the preparations for the Holocaust were underway, the Nazis unveiled a new film, a propaganda masterpiece, Der ewige Jude, German for The Eternal Jew. By the way, I'm pretty sure you can see this on YouTube if you want to see clips of this. Although the Nazis intended the title as a slur, it was the very eternity of the Jews that challenged Hitler's ideas about the nature of reality. Both the Jews and the Nazis clung to powerful ideas of eternity, heaven on the one hand and the Thousand-Year Reich on the other. The Holocaust was a clash between these two opposing concepts of eternity. By the way, I would slightly amend that to say heaven on earth, a perfected godly world here on earth. Jews prayed for the resuscitation of the dead, a world that was restored to its Garden of Eden-like state. Despite the overwhelming might of the Nazis and the physical helplessness of the Jews, Hitler feared the victory of the eternal Jew. The Jews had compounded their crime of spreading their ideas into the world by refusing to vanish like other peoples. Somehow the eternal Jew had survived and thrived for more than 3,000 years. Hitler and the Nazis could only attribute the Jews' unnatural state of existence and impact to a vast conspiracy extending across thousands of years. By the way, I think that's what informs a lot of anti-Semitism today. I think a lot of Holocaust denial, by the way, is basically they can't understand. You're really telling me that 1/3 of you was wiped out, 2/3 of your European population, the Jews of Europe, and yet you bounced back so quickly, and look at Israel thriving now and Jews thriving. They think there's a conspiracy behind it. Well, no, it's actually just the incredible, indomitable Jewish spirit. But when Julius Streicher, the Nazi leader, whom the Nuremberg prosecutions said had, quote, educated the whole of the German people in hatred, when he fell into American hands when the war ended, he explained to his interrogator that, quote, the German people will not be free of the danger of the Jewish plague until the Jewish question is liquidated in its entirety. The danger of the plague infecting the German people will continue to exist as long as there is a seed of this pestilence anywhere in the world. Asked for clarification from the perplexed interrogator, Streicher answered that the Jewish question would not be solved as long as any Jew lives because of the, quote, biblical covenant between the Lord and Abraham and to the circumcision of the Jews as a sign of it. Remarkable. In December 1941, when Hitler made the catastrophic decision to declare war on the United States, he accused President Roosevelt and the Jews of preparing a second Purim. He was referring to the Jewish holiday that commemorates the improbable victory of the Jews throughout the Persian Empire 2,500 years ago against Haman and his genocidal designs. In January 1944, as Berlin was being bombed, Hitler delivered a radio address warning that if the Nazis lost, there would be a second triumphant Purim festival. It's just amazing, I think sometimes we think of Hitler as, the all-powerful, almighty kind of demagogue of Europe that saw himself as indestructible. Inside his head, he was so insecure, so threatened, so worried about the Jews. He really believed deep down, he saw there was this metaphysical battle going on between him and the Jews. And he wasn't wrong. Let's continue. In 1946, when Julius Streicher was led out of the gallows with 9 other Nazis sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials and came face to face with the rope that would end his life, he screamed Purim Fest 1946. The Nazis had a special obsession with the Jewish holiday of Purim. In 1941, in a Polish town, the Nazis had decided to create their own twisted version of Purim. They demanded the Jews choose 10 of their own, by lot, to be handed to avenge the death of Haman's 10 sons, who were hanged in the wake of his failed attempt to exterminate the Jews. Wow, I never knew this. This is fascinating and tragic. At their hanging on Purim morning, the assembled Jews were told that these 10 were being executed in revenge for Haman. But when the 10 condemned men learned that their deaths would save the Jewish community, they were filled with a strange joy and sang as they stepped up to the gallows. The Jews who died knew their deaths were Al-Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of God. They found meaning in their deaths because they knew they were part of a great ongoing story, of their own lives and their people, of Jewish strength, of the Spirit, and that victory would come in due time. There was no singing when 10 Nazis, including Streicher, were hanged for their crimes on October 16, 1946. Streicher and his fellow Nazis found no such comfort or meaning in their deaths. They knew they had lost the world war over humanity's core values. In the battle for the soul of humanity, the law of dominance and power that Hitler sought to restore was defeated by the Jewish ethos of human dignity that has shaped civilizations. The frenzied cry of Purim Fest suggests that Streicher saw the modern recreation of the Purim story, that again, in the latest attempt at genocide, the Nazi Hamans end on the gallows. The Nazis had worked to disprove Purim and Jewish destiny, only for Streicher to realize in the closing moments of his life that he was the latest actor in the ongoing Purim story. Why were Hitler and the Nazis so obsessed with this particular holiday? Jewish holiday. Streicher testified at Nuremberg that he had studied the Torah and read the work of Jewish scholars. He was intimately familiar with the Purim story. It seemed that when people like Streicher studied the Torah, they naturally gravitated towards the figure most like themselves. Haman seems to exterminate the Jews. He advises the king that they are unlike any other people, they're a disruptive element, being scattered throughout the kingdom, and following their own laws. All this, power and wealth, is worth nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, Haman wails, at a crucial moment in the book of Esther. Despite being the second most powerful man in the world's mightiest empire, he could not tolerate one Jew refusing to acknowledge that power, his power, was everything. Similarly for Hitler, the military conquest of all of Europe was meaningless to him if one Jew remained alive. In his declaration of war against America, Hitler was deploying Haman-esque rhetoric about the danger that the Jews posed to the world. Just as Haman gave up his wealth and power in a bid to exterminate the Jews, Hitler sacrificed Germany, its soldiers, and the war he had begun to his obsession with destroying the Jews. Hamas and the radical Islamists prefer killing Jews and destroying Israel over the value of protecting their own people and building a prosperous society for them. The essence of Purim is the story of reversal. It's a holiday celebrated with costume masquerades and with the tradition of drinking ad de lo yada until the drinker cannot distinguish between Haman and Mordecai. This commemorates the genocidal plot that was turned upside down, transforming Purim from a day of sorrow to rejoicing, and from mourning into a holiday. Reversal, strength becoming weakness and weakness turning into strength, the victim emerging triumphant and his killer falling victim to his own plot, is a fundamental Jewish idea. It pervades not only Purim, but the entire Jewish story. The implausible survival and civilizational influence of the Jews through thousands of years of persecution, despite enduring hatred with no parallel, reverses the natural course of events. The Nazis believed that nothing is mightier than nature, while the Jews insisted that God is above nature and that he created us to rise above our physical nature and the natural course of events. Hitler believed that the insolent Jewish insistence that man conquers nature was a trick, but the trick proved to be another reversal of the natural order. When God lifted Abraham above the stars in an early prophetic vision, he was showing him that his people will not be subject to the normal, natural rules and patterns of history. As the 19th century philosopher known as the Malbim explains, Abraham's descendants will shine light to the world, as the stars do. They will be eternal, as the stars are, and yet they will be above the stars, i.e. not subjected to the normal earthly laws of cause and effect. American founding father Alexander Hamilton observed the same phenomenon 3,800 years later when he wrote, "Progress of the Jews from their earliest history to the present time has been and is entirely out of the ordinary course of human affairs. Is it not then a fair conclusion that the cause also is an extraordinary one? In other words, that it is the effect of some great providential plan?" Jewish history is a series of unexpected reversals in which the revolutionary messages and beliefs of a tiny, despised people somehow become adopted by most of the world. The Nazis began the 1940s on top of the world, but half a decade later they had fallen as thoroughly as Haman. To his credit, Hitler did suspect that there were mysterious forces working in the Jews' favour when he declared that destiny, perhaps for reasons unknown to us poor mortals, desired the final victory of this little nation. How else to explain their outside influence on all sectors of modern Germany, their dramatic impact on world history, indeed their very survival? Adolf Hitler was right to fear the Jews. The Jewish people are the burning bush that will not be consumed. Now, they have a little, before the chapter finishes and gives a conclusion about this and Hitler's obsession, it has a short chronology of elements of Jewish history. And it's only a few lines, but I want to share it with you because it's fascinating. So let's quickly understand this. 3,300 years ago, the superpower of the day, Egypt, brutally enslaves the Jewish people for over 200 years. The Jewish people emerge with the Torah to share with the world its lessons of love, freedom, and justice. 2,500 years ago, the superpower of the day, Persia, declared genocide. The Jewish people survived and rebuilt the Second Temple in Israel. 2,200 years ago, the superpower of the day, Greece, declared war on Torah and the Jewish religion. The ragtag Jewish militias defeated them, gained newfound independence. 2,000 years ago, the superpower of the day, the Roman Empire, crushed Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple, slaughtered over 1 million people, exiled the survivors. By the way, also renamed the land Judea to Palestine to sever that connection. By the way, called it Palestine before there were any Arabs living there. Hint, hint. And they expected that to be the end of the Jewish story, but it wasn't. For 1,300 years, the European Christian Empire relentlessly persecuted the Jews through pogroms, forced conversions, inquisitions, ghettos, and economic exclusions to prove that the Jews were now despised by God. Instead, Jews adapted, survived, and built study halls and spiritual kingdoms in the ghettos and wastelands they were afforded. For 1,400 years, Jews under Islam were, together with Christians, given the status of dhimmi, legally second-class citizens. While they fared better in Islamic lands than under the Christians, their inferior status often led to persecution. 100 years ago, the Russian communists declared Judaism obsolete and Zionism illegal. About 80 years later, 1 million Soviet Jews emerged and made Aliyah to Israel, helping it become the startup nation. About 90 years ago, Hitler decided humanity needed a final solution to the Jewish problem. He built the superpower of the day and executed mankind's most ruthless and systematic genocide. The 1,000-year Reich crumbled and the Jews emerged and re-established the state of Israel. And after World War II, the Arab and Islamic world, the one Nazi ally that escaped undefeated and unrepentant, carried on the battle in Hitler's shadow. After failing to throw the Jews in the sea, in the Independence War of 1948, the Arabs, Islamists from Saudi Arabia to Iran, and Palestinians with some European help have continued with 75 years of constant terror, wars, boycotts, and diplomatic delegitimization. And it's been disgraceful, by the way. The Jews, however, prevailed and built the only democracy in the Middle East. Mark Twain said in 1899 that all things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So it says, to conclude, it says, we began this book with the Dalai Lama's search for the Jewish secret to survival and success, exploring how the Jews remained a cohesive people with a common identity, values, and culture. Now we know the secret. Hitler understood the secret too. In 1941, after sharing it with the Mufti, he asked him to lock it in the uttermost depths of his heart. Hitler told the Mufti, this was the decisive struggle. Ideologically, it was a battle between National Socialism and the Jews. World War II was the last gasp historical grab for power by an almost defeated foe. It was now or never, and Hitler knew it. In an NSDAP speech in 1922, he already articulated that. Here too there can be no compromise. There are only two possibilities, either victory of the Aryan or annihilation of the Aryan, and the victory of the Jew. The Nazis knew it was an either-or war, and the Germans were humanity's last chance to defeat the Jewish worldview. It cost 60 million lives fighting, although many were not conscious of it, over which ideology would rule. But Hitler was rejected. The Holocaust and 100 years of Arab-Islamic Jew hatred are the world's most recent negative reactions to the Jewish story. Millions of Jews have been killed for it, and millions of individual Jews opted out or were forced out along the long journey. But overall, the Jewish people have bravely held on. This is the mystery that the Dalai Lama and Mark Twain wondered about. The Jewish people are a superpower in humanity's primal spiritual world war. The great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy wondered, the Jew is the emblem of eternity. He whom neither slaughter nor torture of thousands of years could destroy. He whom neither fire nor sword nor inquisition was able to wipe off the map of the earth. He was the first to produce the oracles of God. He who has been for so long the guardian of prophecy and who transmitted it to the rest of the world. Such a nation cannot be destroyed. The Jew is as everlasting as is eternity itself. The Jews have endured the most severe persecutions while wielding improbable influence over the course of human events, because they are the carriers of information so potent that it has drawn both vehement opposition and begrudging respect from nations, even as the clarity of its contents has dimmed in collective memory. For most of the past 2,000 years, the Jews have always fought with the only weapons available to them, what the Torah calls Jewish weapons of the spirit: prayer, Torah study, ethical observance, and belief in God and his plan. King David summarized it. They call on chariots, they call on horses, but we call on the name of the Lord our God. The prophet Zechariah declared, this is the word of God to Zerubbabel. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, said the Lord. Recently, the Jewish people, much to the world who seem to love dead Jews more than live ones, have added a physical army to their spiritual arsenal, as they had for centuries during the First and Second Jewish Commonwealths. But Hitler also understood that Jewish power was not primarily physical. The Jewish state has never been spatially limited in itself. It was universally unlimited in respect to space, but was restricted to the collectivity of the race. The question remains, why are the Jews indestructible? The answer, in short, is that the Jewish people are essential to fulfilling the world's purpose. God's plan requires an indestructible people. Now, what's even more remarkable, and I think Rabbi Sachs points this out, the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, he said, look at the Jewish people actually, in many respects, when you compare, let's say, Jacob to Esau, Isaac to Ishmael, actually sometimes we were the less remarkable, less physically strong, less talented. And that's part of what makes us God's people, his vehicle through which he reveals himself, because according to the natural course of events, we shouldn't still be here. We shouldn't have survived. We shouldn't have thrived. And so actually God used the Jewish people, he works through the Jewish people to reveal his hand in events by us throughout most of our history, having our hands tied behind our backs, being small in number, scattered all over the world, intensely persecuted, and yet we are still here and shown the most incredible spiritual resilience despite all that. And I think that's where the remarkableness of the Jewish people has really shone through more than anything else. So what's so interesting is that whether it's Hitler or whether it's Hamas, sometimes it's our enemies who seem to understand us even better than we do. They know exactly who we are. They know what it is we represent. And they actually have the ability to sometimes wake us up to that. If you think about it, who are the people that have gone against the Jews throughout history? These people represent the darkest forces that exist within the human psyche and human ideology. If they see the Jews as their primary enemy, what does that say about the Jews? Darkness hates light. If darkness identifies its opponent as the Jews, what does that mean about what the Jews are and what we are meant to be and what our role is in history? Hitler understood that. Hamas understands it. We should too.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.